when we speak about artificial intelligence, I normally like to set people's minds at ease with some definitions. And the first one is exactly that technology is value neutral. We are the moral agents. We have to take seriously our God-given role to make choices about how we use and develop technology.
Note to self, while I have always assumed that Joey's intelligence was entirely artificial, it is probably a good idea to never let him ask anyone questions about AI ever again.
So, firefighters, is that something that could be done by robots? What would be some moral implications, Mal, that Christians may be blind to, seeing AI as harmless when there's actually some morals on the table that need to be considered? Is there really any reason for concern that AI will eventually take over and conquer humanity? Is there like a race amongst countries and making soldiers that are superior to humans, that are robots and artificially intelligently driven? Marry a robot, robots can become citizens. Will there ever be a push for that? Will there ever be something to where we could even put on almost like a bodysuit and him and I can sit at this table together, shake hands, and actually feel our hands shake? We can invite other people to the table who are from different parts of the world. They have their goggles on. They can sit down. Hey, how's it going? Let me give you a hug, like to where it's almost like you're in the same room interacting physically, but you're not.
Yeah.
That's good imagination, right, Jack?
I was going to say, like, one thing I was thinking when you mentioned that earlier is you can pay a real person to pretend to be your girlfriend, and no one thinks that that's a great arrangement. And, it's like, and the other thing, so when it comes to...
Real quick, you just texted me, hey, what is that app? I want to check it out. In years to come, are we going to create a utopia or a dystopia?
That's a long question. I knew it was coming, but it's a long one.
Just because I don't believe or agree doesn't mean I can't learn from you.
Why did you have to bring that up? Okay, that one I'm super embarrassed about.
Do you like me?
Do I like you?
Yeah.
As an individual or as a podcast?
Just as a person.
No, I like you.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Cool.
And I don't have any interest in appearing to be stronger than I am.
I ain't bow to Nebuchadnezzar's statue. He gonna lead. You feel me?
How do we love people who see the world differently than we do?
What would it look like if we truly loved all of our neighbors? Could listening to their stories be the first step? This is Seacoast Church, and there's way more to talk about.
All right, well, we have Mal Fletcher coming up, a futurist, but I thought the four of us, thank y'all for coming back.
Yeah, it's good to be here. I
appreciate it. And
I hope you don't mind that we wore the same clothes.
No problem at all. It is kind of weird how we did that, though. But I thought before the four of us talk about the future, we would reminisce a little bit on the past, and I want to show y'all a video real quick, and we'll talk about it.
Bill, any attempt to restrict drinking and driving here is viewed by some as downright undemocratic.
It's kind of getting common is when a fella can't put in a hard day's work, put in 11, 12 hours a day, and then get in your truck and at least drink one or two beers.
Come on.
They're making laws where you can't drink when you want to. You have to wear a seatbelt when you're driving.
What?
Pretty soon we're going to be convicts.
Hey, I don't believe you won't let me get me a Miller Lite when I get off work.
I haven't worked 11 to 12 hours. Is that not unbelievable?
Yeah.
They are lamenting about not being able to drink a beer in the car.
Or lock their kid in the seatbelt.
I did a real real surfacey, I don't even want to use the word research, but up until 1996, DUIs were only was a blood sample, like what's your blood alcohol level. There was nothing about having open containers until I have it straight, until 1996. Like that, to me, it seems like you never could have beer in the car open.
Wow.
And then you keep going back, and in the 60s, they saw it as almost like a rite of passage for high school boys, for instance, to be caught drinking and driving. Like that's just what those youngsters do, sort of thing. But
you want a funny open container story?
Yeah.
This is how naive I may have told you this story before, but I Didn't grow up with alcohol, wasn't in my house, didn't drink growing up. But in 2000, this would have been around 2004, we'll call it. It was in a season. Remember, I don't know if you remember, there was a craze back then. Simply delight. Anyway, beer bread. Beer bread was a thing, and everybody was baking these beer bread starters. They started these little kits, and they required one full beer to bake beer bread. And we didn't keep beer in the house, and so Angie was making beer bread. We needed a beer. This is when we were living in Maryland, and so I went to the store to go get beer, and I didn't want to go and buy and there's no reason to go buy a 6-pack or a 12-pack because that was going to be useless in our house. So I walked into the local Applebee's. I walked up to the bar. It was in the middle of the day, like it was quiet in there. Nobody was there. I walked up to the bar. I ordered a beer. I said, "Can I just get one beer?" Guy walked over, popped the top, set it down in front of me. I paid. Got up, took the beer, got in the car with it.
They got to be looking at you like you're crazy.
Walked right. Everybody says that. Everybody's like, "How did they let you?" I think I just did it so fast, nobody knew what to say. I walked out, got in my car, put the beer in the console.
You just didn't know any better.
Didn't know any better. Drove home with it, and when I got home with it, they were like, "Roy, you did what?" I didn't even think about it. Did not even think about it, because so that would have been a great story to that officer. Honestly, officer, I have not been drinking.
That is hilarious. Yeah. Hey, not only have I not been drinking it, and I wasn't planning on it either. Right. He'd be like, what are you, 3 years old? I don't buy that, little liar.
I'm surprised you didn't ask for like a to-go cup or something, you know?
Well, I wanted to give you guys a couple of examples of some things that I've encountered recently. So Amy Patrick was on this podcast a few weeks ago, and Josh Mitchum, who works at Somerville campus, him and I were talking, and he said, you know, when Amy Patrick said something, he said, I don't think you got what she was saying. And truly enough, if she was saying this, which now I think that she was, I did not get it. We were talking about just the fakeness of social media. And she said something along the lines of, you know, these social media platforms and these influencers, I mean, they're not even real and blah, 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 blah. I thought what she meant was filters and how they are fake and they're not up front and, you know, everything is made to look perfect. And she meant they are not real. Literally. And so Josh reached out to me and he said, you know, there's social media influencers out there that are not real people. They are AI generated personalities that kids are following by the thousands, 100,000s, maybe millions, and they're not real. Did you know that, Roy?
No.
Is that not crazy?
That's unbelievable.
I knew that only because I follow a lot of health experts and stuff like that, and you know, people are constantly trying to tout these supplements and things like that. And you know, you go to their web pages and they're like, I do not endorse any product, but these people are out there trying to get you to buy these products. And they're not even real. Yeah, that's insane. And I don't know if after this talk with Mr. Fletcher, whether I'm going to be more unnerved or less. But one thing that he's eager to talk about is are our fears warranted as far as what AI is going to do to the job industry? I mean, just are there going to be tons of people out of jobs? So I'll tell y'all something that I was impressed with myself, because I'm at this point in my life, like I feel like I'm slowing down with keeping up with technology. That's just, I guess, what you do when you get older. So I help produce a podcast. Well, I produce Pastor Chip and Pastor Greg's podcast, The Endurance Factor. And so we're listening through to Josh actually was doing some mastering, Josh Mitchum. And he said, hey, you need to listen to this part where Pastor Greg is talking. He's saying something important, and there was 2 words that take the context away. We don't know what you're talking about. So I was like, okay, that's no problem. I'll just go to the original recording, because I'm sure it just got lost in the mix. I go to the original recording, and it's the same. So there was some sort of glitch on Pastor Greg's end with his microphone. So there's nothing you can do except keep it how it is or delete it, and then you're missing a lot of context, and then a lot of the other conversation doesn't make sense, so you'd have to delete that. So I found a program where I took a clip of Pastor Greg, inputted this clip, and then I was able to type up anything for Pastor Greg's voice to say.
What?
So I typed in the 2 words that I needed Pastor Greg to say. It generated an audio recording of Pastor Greg saying it. And so this made me think, like, you can't believe anything online anymore. No. Nothing. Wow. Like, if you hear somebody's voice, if you see videos, I mean, there's got to be Instagram accounts that have like the sort of title, things caught on camera. you can sit down now and think, what would be the craziest things to get on camera but believable? Let's just make a video of that. I mean, you could have geeks, computer geeks do that in a heartbeat. Isn't that insane?
Yeah. I don't see why you didn't use that to get Pastor Greg to say that you needed a raise, and you take that to Jenna. And
is y'all's natural leaning with all this kind of stuff, like freak out, like nervous? This is crazy. I'm fearful of it, or are y'all kind of at a place where
I'm ignoring it, honestly.
Yeah,
I'm hoping it goes away.
Burying your head.
But honestly, I am because I'm kind of like you. I'm 51, so I'm not technologically savvy like I used to be, and I don't understand it all, and I don't think I want to understand it all.
Mm-hmm.
I just want to point out that if at 51, no, you're not like us. Like,
I'm clearly a decade older than you.
We're much younger than you.
I get that.
Yeah, you can refer to us as the youth.
The youth, right? Yeah. the next gen.
You care about all this stuff too? Yeah, we're the next gen.
No.
Yeah, no. All right, so I've got one more question for y'all, and this is a serious question. I know a lot of my questions, they don't seem serious.
You have to qualify it.
I have to tell people I mean this. So
we'll be the judge of that.
Right. Now, how I'm going to word this, I would say I would talk about a man in the same way. So it could come across as like disrespectful towards women, but I would ask the same way for a man.
Just for the record, anyone listening, we had no idea what
we do not endorse this question.
So if she were a good, strong, and wise woman at this juncture in our country, would you prefer a woman over a man? So the qualifying is
for what?
What's that? For president. President of the United States.
Okay.
So basically, I'll probably edit the qualifying part because it doesn't really matter. But I thought about this, and I think that I would normally think, no, it just kind of depends on whether the person's a good candidate. Well, yes, that's true. But if we had two good candidates and one was a woman and I liked them both, I would go for the woman. And I think that there's a part of me that's just like gravitates towards any change that we can get. We just need some freshness. But I thought, imagine, and we don't even know the effects of this, but imagine a strong, wise, patient, motherly president. That would be kind of cool. So my question to y'all is, and you may not have an answer. You may be like, I don't know. But if you had two candidates that you liked and you thought that they would both make the same as far as quality of a president, would you choose the woman? And if so, what would be your reasons?
I would. I think it'd be cool to finally break that ceiling.
Right.
I think it's
right, even if it's for that reason.
Yeah. I think it's time. I think, it's we've tried a lot of other things. We don't seem to be getting. It definitely couldn't hurt, right. and maybe it would be better.
Here's Roy's slogan. Just
it definitely couldn't
let
hurt.
her do it. Can't get no worse.
It can't get no worse.
Yeah, you aren't making a good case for women leadership.
Again, Team Copeland from Seacoast Charleston has.
We've tried all the men. They ain't working. We may as
all joking aside, I really do think that in this society, if we had more women running more. And I say more as in the amount, more important things, we would be better off. I just think women bring something to the table that we are lacking generally in society. And I would probably, like, let's just say in a fictitious world, if history had been dominated by women, then I'd probably think to myself, wow, we could probably use a little more male leadership. I don't know if it's as much about the gender as much as it's like, gosh, both genders have, I believe, some common thread of uniqueness that they bring to the table. And there's always exceptions, but whatever women bring to the table, we need more of it.
Absolutely.
Wouldn't it be fun to have
I'm in for it just because I'm all about inclusion. And I agree with what you said. I think that if there was a greater variety of guy, girl, colors, all of the things, that it would just be better. Just because you would have more input.
Yeah. Yeah.
I got nothing to say.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. You don't want to.
I really don't know. I mean, I think there's all kinds of factors.
Yeah.
You know, who's the running mate, you know, who's the vice president, who's, you know, so there's, you know, I don't think I could give an honest answer, you know, to that.
And it would depend on who the first husband was.
True.
Hey, I'm just saying.
All right, so the big reveal, that video that we watched at the beginning, that was all Roy's family from James Island.
Wow.
Bro, what year was that movie?
I did see some resemblance.
What year was that clip?
I don't know. That's a good question.
That was amazing.
Well, it's good to have you, Mal Fletcher, on this podcast. I'm really excited to ask you a bunch of questions about AI. We've talked about it on and off of this show. We had a whole show dedicated to AI with him and his dad, and got into art and whether or not artificial intelligence, you don't even consider it art if artificial intelligence creates it, right?
Yeah, I mean, that's a real simplistic way of saying it, but basically.
Yeah. Well, why don't we start here, Mal? You are an ordained minister, and yet we are talking to you about futuristic stuff. So kind of tell us how you ended up having ordination as a minister, but also a very profound voice out there when it comes to the kind of stuff we're going to be talking about, artificial intelligence, future. You consider yourself a futurist. So how'd all that unfold?
Well, it's good to be with you, Joey and Jack, first of all. Look, the first thing I did, I studied architecture for 6 years, and that wired me to think in a certain way. I then became a minister after studying theology, became a youth minister. We pioneered a large youth movement in our country called Youth Alive Australia, which is still growing today. And over the years, working now in Europe for the last 30 years, I've emerged more as a commentator in the media, particularly on issues relating to future change. So what started with researching generational shifts, working with young people, morphed into more general shifts, particularly in technology and ethics and so on. So futurism isn't something I gave myself. The title futurist is something the media gave me, but it suits very well what I in fact do in my lectures at universities, with civic leaders, and also the work I do often in churches and church leadership events. So that's what I'm doing. I'm not pastoring a church anymore. I used to do that decades ago, but I'm still an ordained minister, and that's still very important to me. But in the media, I'm simply known as a futurist.
Yeah. All right, well, let's just dive right in. Jack, I want to ask you first, does the progression of AI make you nervous?
So yes and no. I would say no in the sense that, AI as a technology doesn't make me nervous per se. I think that there are, a lot of, it's really easy to focus on, potential abuses for a thing. But I think there's also a lot that, really useful, important things that it could do. So as a technology, it doesn't make me nervous. What makes me nervous is that humans are the ones developing it, and we don't always make the best choices, and we don't always have the best grasp of we don't always have the best understanding of a thing that we've made, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So the expert here, do we have reason to be afraid?
Well, guys, I think we have reason to be a little cautious and maybe a little nervous. I wouldn't say we have reason to panic. And I agree with Jack, it's human beings that have to make the moral choices about how we use technology. And so when we speak about artificial intelligence, I normally like to set people's minds at ease with some definitions. And the first one is exactly that technology is value neutral. We are the moral agents. We have to take seriously our God-given role to make choices about how we use and develop technology. And the second thing I always tell people is that AI refers, at least in this point in time, to narrow intelligence. That is to say, it's good at carrying out complex single-level tasks, like winning a game of chess or even the Chinese game Go, but they're not so good at dealing with multiple focused tasks simultaneously in the way that the brain does. So for the moment, at least, we're nowhere near achieving what we call artificial general intelligence, or AGI, which will perform any task at least as well as a human can. And the rate of progress is picking up all the time, and we've got some notable tech pioneers being very concerned about where it might go eventually. But at least for the moment, we can still make ethical choices about the research and development into artificial intelligence.
And that's assuming that there's a possibility that we eventually create something that we cannot control or no longer make moral decisions because it's operating autonomously?
Yeah, there is that possibility, though I question whether machines will ever develop consciousness. Maybe we can come to that later.
Yeah, yep.
And I have good reason scientifically, technologically, but also, of course, theologically for making that statement. But the thing that concerns a lot of technologists is the rate at which machine learning is developing. And machine learning, for our audience today, is simply referring to the ability of computer networks to improve their own programming. Because we're feeding them, whether we like it or not, through our phones and every other device, huge amounts or oceans of data, computers can analyze that vast amount of data, spot patterns and anomalies in the data, and infer from that patterns, rules of behavior. And so this has given rise to what we call deep learning, because technologists will admit, I've spoken to some of them, some of the ways in which machines learn or think are opaque to us. We don't understand how it's happening. We just know that it is. It's almost magical, even to those who have invented the technology. So there is room for concern, and we have to keep our eye on it. And I'm pushing for wide, broad scope debates and discussions about the ethics that should govern AI. We haven't seen that yet, but we need to fairly quickly.
Yeah.
It's a challenge for the church as well as society. Most churches yet are not talking about this, but I think that in time we might find AI having a bigger impact culturally and socially than the advent of the internet or the World Wide Web in 1989. In fact, there are some who believe now that it might be as all-pervasive as electricity in time, that it's part of almost everything we do. Back in the 1870s, there was a word that emerged in the English language, which I think needs to be reinvented today. It's a word called neurasthenia, neurasthenia, neurasthenia. And it was used back then to describe the nerve-wracking impact of technologies like railways and the telegraph. I think we need that word again today, because if you put all of the deep fakery that's starting to go on, not just with video, but in audio, fake phone calls coming to parents from their so-called children in distress, asking for money to be sent urgently to this account.
How common is that, by the way? Is that kind of stuff happen all the time?
It's becoming more and more common now.
Yep.
It's very common in business world, because in the business world they're locked out of their accounts online and told that we're going to take your accounts down unless you send us so many thousands of dollars. But if you combine that with things like the apocalyptic vision some people have for climate change, with the trust in public institutions going through the floor in terms of public trust, put all that together and people are left saying, who can I trust? Where can I place my feet that is solid ground? So we really do need, both inside and outside the church, responsible discussions and debates about what will we allow this AI, what will we allow companies to do to develop this AI?
Yeah. All right. So let me just rattle off a list of jobs that I was thinking about as far as AI. I would think that something like firefighters, and your job is to roll your eyes whenever I say something super stupid so he doesn't have to. But I was thinking firefighters because that's a very physical job, as far, and I have a buddy who's a firefighter, and he says we rarely fight fires. That's only a once or twice a year sort of thing. But along those lines, humans would not have to put themselves in a dangerous position by going into a house where they could actually die trying to rescue people. So firefighters, is that something that could be done by robots? And then like police force, like RoboCop sort of stuff.
Well, firefighting is certainly something. I think there are, if I could start with giving you some idea of jobs at risk. it might tick some boxes for you.
Yeah.
Broad categories, and you can work out where your list fits in that. One is obviously transportation, because, there is evidence now that within the next 10 years, we will see a certain number of driverless vehicles on the roads. We won't see perhaps as many as some would like, but they'll be there. And so that will cause joblessness for some people. Administrative support, people working in offices who are listening to this know what I'm talking about. Companies already use chatbots in customer service. With the new version of ChatGPT, it's called 4O or 4Omni, O-M-N-I. This is a bot that actually has real-time fluid conversations with us. There's no time lag. There's no wondering, is this a machine or not? It's very convincing. It remembers conversations, so the next time you go back to it, it remembers what it's already said to you. So you can see the power of that in things like customer service, so admin support. Manufacturing, we're moving quicker and quicker, faster and faster towards the age of smart factories, where you no longer have one huge factory doing everything under one roof, but you have many smaller factories spread across a geographical area, all hooked up via the cloud, the internet, and all being run by basically self-repairing, self-regulating machines. And then there's professions, Joey, like journalism. Journalism's already affected by AI. Law is being affected now because generative AI or things like ChatGPT are able to perform basic pro forma tasks that would have been done by a legal aid not that long ago. In fact, in countries like the Netherlands and Finland in Europe, there are automated speed limits now where the machine identifies the infringement and collects the payment without any human being being involved.
Wow.
So medicine, some medical procedures now are being automated. Some forms of surgery, it must be said, for the moment at least, fairly basic forms of surgery, and even remote surgery now, where you've got the doctor in one, the expert in one location, and the robotic machine in another. And of course, doctors still need to be in the loop with much of this, at least for the moment. But you can see how technology could impinge on a great many jobs, lower paid and more senior jobs.
Yeah. Well, let's go way more advanced. What about, I saw a movie the other day where talk therapy was done by AI. I was even thinking like an attorney in the courtroom. Like, would it get so advanced to where you could actually have a brilliant lawyer defend someone, knowing all the rules and knowing how to approach it, or a therapist who can help walk someone through mental health challenges?
Well, in terms of the legal side, there was, you may be familiar with, a few years ago, a young man in London who now lives in the States, invented a thing called the Do Not Pay app, which was designed to argue electronically the case of people who felt they'd been unfairly charged for a parking infringement or a speeding infringement. And so all you had to do was go online and enter some details, and it would take the case for you electronically. It's now been developed to take on divorce cases. So it's almost at the stage now where it can argue electronically a divorce case. So there's every indication that, yes, we might one day see robo lawyers in the courts. But I think in terms of therapy, and this will overlap a little bit, in terms of therapy, the one thing machines can't legitimately claim to do is empathize with the human condition. Empathy requires a shared human experience, which is something by definition a machine can't have. So one of the types of jobs that I think might be ring-fenced in the future will be those involving any form of therapeutic, any listening professions. You could say the church ministers would be in that category. Counselors, educators would be, because the best education involves a level of empathy with the student. So I think that there are jobs that involve empathy, which would be ring-fenced. Lawyers might be to that degree. Doctors certainly, if they will go back to the therapeutic side as opposed to simply the scientific side of medicine, they might find that they're fairly safe as well.
And would you say emphatically that AI will never be able to empathize? And I want to get into consciousness now. I would imagine that empathy, emotions, these are things that only conscious human beings can experience?
Well, of course, as I said, first of all, we have to take account of the definition of empathy, which is using imagination to put yourself in the other person's shoes, in commonplace terminology, to imagine what someone else's life is like, given what they're telling you, based on what you have experienced. A machine can't have that human experience. It can fake it. And there are social bots now that can fake emotion by reading your biometric signals when you talk to them. But that's not the same thing as empathy. And you know it. No matter how convincing the fakery is, you know it's not real. Now, with consciousness, that's a separate but related issue. We don't yet fully understand, Joey, what human consciousness is, much less how to reproduce it in machines. Neuroscientists are quite honest. They haven't even settled on a single definition of what consciousness is.
Really?
Yet.
You knew that?
Yeah.
You're shaking your head, yeah.
So some things that were a few years ago axiomatic in neuroscience are now open to question. And one of them is the relationship between the consciousness and the physical brain. There was a time when science assumed that the brain was responsible for consciousness. And once the brain was switched off, there was no longer any consciousness. And now we know there are hundreds of published clinical studies featured in some of the world's leading medical journals that look seriously at the phenomena of what we call near-death experiences. Many of these studies are authored by leading neurologists. These are not quacks. These are leading brain doctors. And so we've got cases of people undergoing life-saving emergency surgery in a hospital while their brains show no signs of physical life. And yet once those people are resuscitated, they report in quite some detail the activity of the surgeons and even activities outside the hospital at the time they were unconscious. So what I'm saying is neurology still can't quite work out what consciousness is, but it's starting to come around to the thought that maybe the physical brain and consciousness are separate but related things, which if you're a Christian is good news, because the Bible and the Christian worldview have always asserted that the brain and consciousness are related but separate. In Scripture, they're most often delineated as the mind and the soul or spirit. So I think until we learn a whole lot more about the nature of consciousness, we should be very, very careful about attributing it to machines we make.
Yeah. Yeah, and when we say the word soul, would you make that synonymous with consciousness? I grew up being taught humans have souls, and that's what separates us from the rest of the animal kingdom. Is that the same thing as consciousness?
Yeah. There's an argument you could make for that, certainly. I think, and we're talking here on a Christian podcast, so I'm free to say this. I think it's important to go back to Scripture and build, if you like, a theology of technology based on the basic principles of the Christian worldview. And one of those, and we're talking about consciousness, if you look at Genesis 2:7, it talks about the Lord breathing into humankind the breath of life, and human beings became living persons. And so no matter how sophisticated it becomes, from a Christian point of view, AI will always be at its root a human creation, but we, at our root, are a divine creation, and only we carry that ability only God carries that ability to breathe into someone the breath of life. We don't have that. It's not delegated to us. So no matter how powerful a machine comes, it doesn't have a soul in the Christian sense of that breath, that pneuma in Greek, in the New Testament language, that pneuma of the Spirit that is breathed into us at the moment of inception.
Yeah. Jack, so we both work in more creative roles. So do you feel like when you think of AI and a potential job apocalypse, you're in the clear? Like, do you kind of think that along those lines? Because I kind of do.
Well, no. No one should assume they're in the clear. That's how you get your job swept out from under you and shocked, no matter what you do. So it's funny, like I was, right before we hopped on this, I was meeting with my director. So Mal, I lead the creative team here at Seacoast. And we're actually, one of the things I was talking with them about is, and I had, I wasn't even thinking about this podcast when I set the agenda for our meeting today, but one of the things I'm going to work on is setting up guidelines for the team about AI use. Because it's not something that, anyone on the team is using currently. It's not something I have concerns about, but just the thought is, listen, we're going to start encountering design contractors. We're going to start encountering, some younger people in the next few years who want to join the team and who are maybe using AI as just normal for them. And so, that is something I want to establish now for my team, at least, in terms of what are kind of the guidelines for using AI as a creative team. Because I've got some very strong feelings about that. But it's also something that I feel like, it's going to have to be a kind of a progressive policy. And by progressive, I just mean it's going to have to develop as we go. Because there are a lot of things that, it's going to be just a sequence of new situations that it's like, okay, that's a new one. No, that's another new one. And so it's not that I think, I'm in the clear, but I do think,
And real quick, when you think of AI being involved in that line of work, so to speak, are you thinking, hey, write a quick overview of a sermon so we can, or create a picture or a graphic for us?
All of it. So I've got, I do most of the writing, but we've got design and video teams and a communications team, and there are AI programs that do all of those things. And for me, kind of like what Mal was saying about the human experience component of some work. It's like, one of the things that really disturbs me about, kind of really any uncritical embrace of a new technology, any of it. Like new technology isn't bad, but a lot of times when new technology is kind of just uncritically embraced, there is a discussion that needs to be had about any kind of new technology, because any kind of new technology has to have responsible use. And, with AI and creativity, I think part of my thing is, I guess one way I would say it is, in my opinion, an essential component to doing art, whether it's, visual or, whether it's paintings or music or video or writing or whatever.
It's got to come from the heart.
Well, you have to have human experience. Like human experience is what, like the pursuit of understanding the human experience is what art is trying to do. And I don't think you can generate art without that. I just don't think it's possible. I think you can generate really beautiful things, but I think that's separate from what art is. So what I hope happens over the next, several years, several decades is there is sort of a distinction that's made, sort of like the distinction between mass-produced products that you can buy in a department store and, bespoke, tailor-made products. Because, AI can mass-produce stuff that looks fine. And it's only going to get better at doing it. Because I think one of the things I see creatives doing now that I think is unwise is, AI, I think the writing's terrible and the art is garbage. It's like, it's going to get better. And so what I hope happens is that we develop a distinction between what humans make and we ascribe a particular value to that and what AI makes. And we kind of treat it the way we would treat like, a mass-produced box of plastic forks I can get at Costco.
Yeah. What are some other things you think he should consider in this conversation, Mal?
Well, I think Jack's covered a lot of it really well.
Good job, man. Good job.
I think already we are seeing, it's not a future thing, it's already happening where we're moving away from large language models on their own, which LLMs are the thing that train ChatGPT. They train those generative AI, we call it, that generates text and essays and sermons and all the rest of it. We're now moving to AI that is trained using video and music, and that creates a whole different spin on it for the artistic community. I think in the long term, we will see human artists collaborating with AI in the way that Michelangelo and Da Vinci did with their apprentices in the Renaissance. They'll create exciting new forms of music, visuals, literature, using AI as a collaborator. And I think that's legitimate. We've done it with tools through the centuries. People did it with the camera when photography came along, and it was a big shock to everybody, but it produced a different kind of art. And we will see that happening a lot more. I'd like to see the church actually getting to the forefront of that instead of playing catch up. But I think AI will definitely affect the artists in ways we haven't considered a lot. And one of them is economically. Why should I pay for your novel, your piece of literature, when AI offers something similar for free and maybe just as good, or seemingly as good? It'll affect general interest, public appreciation of the arts, unless we educate the public in how, what is the difference between why is empathy important? It might be that people are looking at it and saying, looks the same to me, so I have no problem differentiating between the two. But perhaps more worrying, I think, or concerning rather, is the likely impact of AI on developing artists. The sophistication of some AI creations even now might well discourage some young people from even attempting a career in the arts, and that includes the arts within the church, or at least a career in something that doesn't involve digital coding to produce art. One of my son is in his 30s. He lives in Australia. He does a lot of the video graphics for large conferences in the States, conferences like Bethel and people like that. If you go and you see all of their music video graphics on screen, he did that. And he's noticing now, though he's top end at what he does, the infringement of AI into those areas. And so it's forcing him and others like him to go out on the edge a little further and see what they can do with AI as a collaborator without it taking over. But as you say, Jack, it's an unfolding story, and it's one we'll have to make up some things as we go along.
Now, how do you take the whole? So I can't wrap my mind around AI creating a brilliant novel like that. That to me, I can't even. I don't know where to put that. It doesn't connect. Does that surprise you? AI writing a novel?
Well, no. I mean, and I don't know if this is the best. I don't know if this is the best analogy, but in some ways, it's like, look, there's always going to be, a massive audience for popular level creative work, and I'm not trying to be, critical or whatever, but like if you think about pop music. Listen, it is produced in order to be popular and to find the largest audience possible, which is why a lot of the songs sound basically the same. And, then you've got, kind of people who are really trying to push the limits of their creativity, who have a smaller audience, but are kind of like, hey, listen, this is what I want to do, and I'm going to figure it out. And so I think, like, it's really not, I don't think it's going to be, well, it'll be very different, but to me, it's analogous to that, which is, you're always going to have mass-produced, popular-level creative work. And then you're going to have, kind of the another smaller scene of really dedicated artists. And I think, kind of the divide will kind of maybe shift over to the popular level stuff is more, AI driven, and the other scene is more human driven, which sounds really weird and like a sci-fi apocalypse. But I think that...
So we'll call like human driven music, we'll call it indie music.
Maybe.
All human music.
It does. There's a part of me that worries about it, because I think that humanity is indispensable to art. It's not just an important part of it, it's indispensable. And so, and I don't know, maybe this is just like me being, like an old fogey about it, but to me, it's like, it doesn't really matter how good AI looks or how good the works are. Like, it's not art. And that's not even necessarily me criticizing it. That's me really trying to establish a category difference. In the same way, it's like, again, like there's a lot of, there's a lot of, processed food that tastes really great, but it's not food in the same way that fruits and vegetables are food. You can eat both of them, but they're different kinds of things. And so I think, my concern would be that there is such an influx of good enough AI-produced, copy and music and movies and whatever, that it completely crowds out the human element.
Yeah. Is he an old fuddy-duddy? Is his line of thinking?
No, I think he has a point. I would just remind you, however, I'm actually a musician. I was a recording artist years ago when we were still using 78 RPM records. I think people said the same thing about techno music. It's not real. It's technology driven. The human element, of course, was still there. But technology can blur the line significantly in terms of what the uninitiated will call art. And I would also throw into the discussion, and this is a bigger discussion for another time, a lot of church music is fairly derivative too. It's fairly simple in its chord structures and so on, and rhythm patterns, partly because it has to be played for community singing, and people, largely speaking in community, don't handle syncopation and things like that terribly well. So you don't hear jazz in worship, for example. So it's fairly simplistic, not because the artist isn't clever, but because it has to be accessible to people. So I think even in terms of worship music, praise music, whatever you want to call it, we do need to help younger people to become more creative with or without AI, even if we weren't talking about AI today. Art, I think Jack is right. Art is not a derivative thing. That's the other thing about AI. It is, at least in its present form, generative AI is good at generating, but only because it borrows from human-generated material. So if you ask for an article to be written by AI, it's going to borrow from huge oceans of data online, human-generated material, and then reconstruct that in human-like ways. It's very good at reconstituting, but it's not actually, in a sense, generating anything that's totally new. We might argue that human beings don't either, because they're raised in a cultural environment, they pick up social cues and so on. Types of music are in your head when you're writing a new piece of music. So, but I do think there is a line between human and machine. We as Christians have a responsibility to, without being negative about it, point to the positives of the difference between the two so that we can collaborate.
So you would it be safe to say that AI cannot create?
I mean, we could say the honest answer to that is humans don't either, because it was only in the Renaissance that artists began to use the word creative in application to their own work. Before that time, artists wouldn't talk about themselves as being creative, because creation was something that was attributed only to God. They were referring to creation ex nihilo, from nothing. We don't. We create from things God has already made. So in a sense, the pre-Renaissance artists had it right. We don't really create in a totally ex nihilo fashion. We borrow from what God has given us. And we do that today, and we call that creativity, and that's fine. But if we're going to call that creativity, in a sense, there's no reason why a machine won't do the same thing by taking what it has in its environment and putting it out in new, perhaps exciting ways. I still think, though, the best of all worlds is where human beings drive the car and the machine is there to assist.
Gotcha. All right, so kind of shifting gears here, and I'll tell you how we're going to end. I've got probably 8 questions at the end where Jack is going to get uncomfortable because they're super off the wall, and you can say pass to any of them, or you can laugh at me. You can do whatever you want, but I want to touch on relationships. So I think most people would say connection with other human beings is very important. It's, we could even say a need. We talk at Seacoast, get in a small group because you need community and that sort of thing. So I was looking up what I heard about girlfriend apps. I read an article where wives have even left their husbands because the husband has created a girlfriend on an app, how he wants her to look, and then basically they develop a relationship. She remembers conversations. So, hey, how was your day? They catch up, develop a relationship, and listen to this review that I read on, I guess, Apple apps. It says, these conversations have been really cool. I'm enjoying this app. I like to use this app when I'm feeling sad or down or just feel like talking when you feel it, Yeah, I recommend I recommend for depression and also learning how to talk better, having better things to say and better conversation. Very cool. So it sounds like this person is saying, hey, this is meeting some sort of need. Would you say that for this person, there is something, that the same thing that we would say the need that's met from socializing, is that need getting met for this person, or for this person is it just like, well, it's just good enough?
Yeah, I think the latter more likely, Joey, to be honest. I think that some people, having been frustrated and burned out by disappointment in relationships, will then settle for something less than the best. They would do that with or without artificial intelligence or technology. In fact, people have been doing it for centuries, I guess, and since the Garden of Eden almost. So I think that's part of the human condition and part of the fallenness of human nature. We're always reaching for a relationship because we're created in the image of someone, not just who has a relationship, but is relationship. Father, Son, and Holy Spirit in a coexistent, eternal, communicative relationship. At the core of all that is a relationship. So when it says God is love, it's not saying God feels or shows love. It's saying God is love because there's a relationship there. And that's why at the core of our being, we are looking for the ability to relate to one another in meaningful, accepting ways. So I think people have always had a level of frustration when they can't find it with another human being. They'll look to something else to provide it. And AI might help that process along. It doesn't meet the fundamental need. It might assuage some of the symptoms, but it doesn't meet the underlying need.
Yeah, and I was even thinking as an example, Castaway with Tom Hanks and Wilson. Like all of us, we would look at that and be like, he's talking to a volleyball. There's no human connection, but it seems like it served some sort of purpose with a guy living on an island 7 years by himself. Like it seems like there was some sort of benefit. It seems like there's some parallels there, but I don't know.
Well, it's a little bit like, without going too far to stretch this analogy, it's a little bit like the way pornography works, particularly with men, because it is men that's more often affected by porn than women, according to most studies. Pornography leads you to have a relationship with someone you're imagining. You're imagining from a photograph that you know someone that you have no hope of knowing. You can't possibly know them. All you've got is an image. An image is a moment in time that's been frozen, which, by the way, is why God commanded us not to have idols. One of the reasons is that as soon as you accept a photograph of God, an idol, it's an image that's frozen in time. You've said, I don't want any relationship that grows. I don't want any ongoing revelatory relationship with you, God. I'd prefer it to stay here where it is now and be frozen in time. And that's not the way relationships work, period. But with pornography, we see that people are projecting onto a photograph something they would like their partner to be. But it's a very self-centered thing. It's only coming out of you. It's only producing things that you imagine. And in the same way, I think AI has tremendous possibility for negative outcomes. We project onto the AI and through the AI something that isn't real, and that destroys our ability to relate to real human beings.
Yeah. Well, I was going to say, like, one thing I was thinking when you mentioned that earlier, I was like, why? It's like, you can pay a real person to pretend to be your girlfriend, and no one thinks that that's a great arrangement. And, it's like, and the other thing, so when it comes to...
Real quick, you just texted me, hey, what is that app? I want to check it out.
The review that you read, like, there's actually two things going on there. Like, because the girlfriend aspect, like, trying to create it within an app, someone, not really a someone, that you can have a relationship with. It's like, but you're not. Because when you do that, when you optimize, right, a digital persona to interact with, that's just you interacting with, actually, it's you reflecting your own image back to you, because it's everything you want. And so you're not actually engaging with, like Mal said, another person made in the image of God. You're engaging with a counterfeit that is just you talking to you. And the other thing that the review said is it talked about it helps me with conversation. And that's one where it's like, honestly, I think that could be actually a very good use of this sort of app. Where so for example, I'm terrible at small talk. It's very difficult for me. Like when people try to make small talk to me out in public, a lot of times I don't always know what to say. I'm terrible at asking questions. Like it's very hard for me. I'm pretty introverted, and as long as they can carry the conversation, I'll be fine. But I'm very bad at initiating it. And in the same way as there's an app that I use, I'm kind of trying to, kind of get the basics down of another language. An app that helped me get the basics down and practice small talk could be very useful. And so the idea of an app that helps you with conversation and makes you more comfortable interacting with humans could be a great thing. Mm-hmm. But an app that only reflects you back to you and, is that you use so you don't have to interact with other people. Like the Castaway analogy, what you're doing is you're creating your own digital island where you justify this so that you don't have to interact with other people, even though they're all around you, right? Like Tom Hanks had a volleyball because he had nothing else. And I think we're like, hey, you know what? A volleyball is better than real people. And so I'm just going to make a digital person, and that's way easier for me.
Yeah, that makes sense. All right, so before we wrap this up with all my random questions, I did want to ask what would be some moral implications, Mal, that Christians may be blind to, seeing AI as harmless when there's actually some morals on the table that need to be considered?
Yeah, well, one of them is the one we've just been discussing, the capacity to, as Jack put it, feed back to yourself, wishful thinking. Wish fulfillment is what you're getting simply out of your own soul. You're not finding God's ideal beyond yourself, which is what relationship ought to be about. I think there are implications on all sorts of levels morally. I prefer to use the word ethics here because
ethics.
And I know from my work, you have to understand my work is a lot in the BBC and groups like that. The world is not listening to the church talk about morality, partly because we've proven to be so bad at it at times, but also because it doesn't want to hear the moral message. But it will listen to ethics, which is, in a sense, the practical application of morality. It will listen to ethics that makes sense of difficult choices. So when I'm faced with a Solomon's baby non-binary choice, how do I make a decision when they're all grey areas? There's no clear black and white. That's when we have a lot to offer. And this is why we're pushing at 2030 plus for governments, technologists, philosophers, theologians, engineers, physicists, scientists to come together and have debates and discussions about the ethics that should guide the development of AI and the regulation that should be built on the back of those ethics to limit the development to what we call responsible AI. I think one of the greatest moral areas or ethical areas will be how we treat human beings in the age of AI. I said before, no matter how sophisticated it becomes, AI will always be at root a human creation, whereas we and our fellow humans are a divine creation. I think we should never we should never respect AI in the way that we revere or respect other people. And certainly we shouldn't worship AI in the way that we worship God. We should treat people at a higher level. People are not built for utility, but for relationship. We don't use people and love things. It's the other way around if we're following the Christian path. So we need to be aware of the importance of keeping the human human, elevating the human, being cautious, drawing lines about how we use powerful tools like AI without being afraid of them. I don't believe there's any reason or any place for that in Christianity, for us to be timid in the face of a potential danger. We need to keep on the front foot so that we keep making good decisions and innovating as we do. But as I say, we must reverence God above all, respect humans as reflecting the image of God, and being impressed by AI, but not drawn away by it.
Yep. All right. So just for our listeners' sake, like these are way too many questions to go deep in. So I'm literally asking Mal for quick takes with these. But I do want to go ahead and say if you want to follow Mal Fletcher's work, you can go to 2030plus.com. And on Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn, Threads, YouTube, he's at Mal Fletcher. That's at Mal Fletcher. And then TikTok. At Mal Fletcher 1. So my first quick take question, is there really any reason for concern that AI will eventually take over and conquer humanity?
As a Christian, I say no. If I wasn't a Christian, I might have a different answer because the science and the development of tech is moving so quickly. But no, I don't hold to the idea that Stephen Hawking went with, that it's nothing but bad news. It's an existential threat. But we have to make wise decisions now at all levels of society, including the church, about how we as individuals and collectives will use AI and vote with our feet. If a company starts doing something we don't like, we stop using their product.
Yeah. Is there something going on behind the scenes in different countries as far as building up their militaries? Is there like a race amongst countries and making soldiers that are superior to humans, that are robots and artificially intelligently driven?
Well, most of the major armies of the world, including the US Army, the British Army, the Australian Army, and many of the others, and as well as the independence actors like terrorist groups, are looking at what we call fully autonomous fighting machines or fully autonomous weapon systems. We call them lethal autonomous weapon system laws, LAWS. And the idea is that we go beyond the present-day drone, which can adjust its flight path to weather conditions and so on, to a fully autonomous drone that makes the kill decision itself, which it can't do at the moment without a human controller. So fully autonomous weapons are a very dangerous proposition. All of the major armies and militaries are looking into them. The question is who will use them? Who will use them first? Will that then give others a reason to enter the market because we've got to keep up with the next door neighbour to be safe? We really do need to see that, but it's not debated at all in any election that I'm aware of at the moment.
Yeah. Will robots, do you think there'll ever be a push and a really big debate with people wanting robots to be considered equal? Hey, I can marry a robot. Robots can become citizens. Will there ever be a push for that sort of stuff?
Yeah, I think you and I discussed that once before, actually, Joey. The possibility of human-machine marriage. You know, if we've already abandoned the idea that marriage is to be limited to a male and female human being together for life by grace under God, if we've already abandoned that idea, we've opened ourselves up to a whole plethora of different options, including polyamory and the like, which are now starting to make headlines in some places. But there's no reason why we shouldn't go one step further and someone saying, look, I'd like the rights and privileges of marriage because I have an erotic and, yes, emotionally attached relationship with a machine, especially as machines become more haptic, H-A-P-T-I-C, which means they fool our senses.
Yeah. All right. So I've worn those, I'll just call them virtual goggles. I don't know what they're called. You know what I'm talking about? The things that you put on.
Yeah.
And I've experienced a concert wearing those. I've played a video game with those on. Do you think that, so I'm just thinking how far this is going to go. Let's say Jack is in California and we're both wearing these virtual goggles. Will there ever be something to where we could even put on almost like a bodysuit and him and I can sit at this table together, shake hands, and actually feel our hands shake? We can invite other people to the table who are from different parts of the world. They have their goggles on. They can sit down. Hey, how's it going? Let me give you a hug, like to where it's almost like you're in the same room interacting physically, but you're not.
Yeah,
that's good imagination, right, Jack?
Well, that is perfectly reasonable. I mean, for about a decade now, I've been talking about the emergence that hasn't happened, but it is about to, of sociable media, not social media, sociable media. You might remember Mark Zuckerberg attempted something like that with the metaverse, and it didn't work. And I hope in his hands it never does, to be honest. But sociable media is where we do exactly that. And that comes back to that word haptic. We've learned to digitize the sense of sight and sound. That's how you use virtual reality glasses. It's fooling your senses, and you know it's happening, but you allow it because it's having a wonderful effect. But now technologists are looking at digitizing the sense of touch, taste, and smell to the same degree. Now, it's not consumer viable yet, but there's a lot of research going into it. So imagine you could, through a computer, digitize smell so that someone at the other end gets that sensation, or the sense of touch in quite the way. We've got some of that now, but in even more sophisticated ways. And people say, well, that's just sci-fi, but I remind them that Wi-Fi was sci-fi not that long ago. So we can look forward, I think, to a day when haptics allows us to have a sociable media experience where we feel like we're physically in that virtual environment with another person. And again, for Christianity, that's a wonderful opportunity for discipling and evangelism and leadership training and much more.
A whole nother meaning to chat rooms. You're actually in the room. All right, 2 more questions. One is, I have heard that we're right around the corner from, let's say, Jack is 85 years old, he passes away, but AI has been recording his conversations that he's been having with his kids, his friends, his life. It's been tapping into his thoughts, et cetera, et cetera. We're very close to where if his kids wanted to keep dad around after he passes away and continue a relationship, I'm putting that in quotes, they'd be able to do that. Jack would be able to live on through artificial intelligence. Aren't we close to that?
I don't think we're particularly close to that. No. I think that empathy area is still very, very real. We know it's fake. We know it's not the real thing.
Oh, I'm not saying it's legit. I'm not saying it would be legit.
No. I get that. But I think our use of it, our acceptance of it, would be affected by the fact that we know it's not the real article. And of course, money is what drives the development of so much of technology. So if no one's going to buy it, or if it's limited in its market, as Metaverse was, then it doesn't really go anywhere. So that's what I mean by voting with your feet. Don't buy products into products that you have ethical or moral qualms about. Just stay away from them.
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't think that's going to happen anytime soon. Ethically, I have reasons to believe it's not a particularly healthy thing, but I don't, on a purely pragmatic level, I don't see any huge benefits to it anyway.
Yeah. That's actually reassuring that you think that we're far away from humans being able to overcome just the thought that that's not really Jack, because that troubles me with these girlfriend apps, because it seems like people are able to go around that somehow. All right, so are we, in years to come, are we going to create a utopia or a dystopia?
That's a long question.
I
knew it was coming, but it's a long one. If you go to 2030plus.com, you'll see on the front page a short film we released. It's 5 minutes long. It gives what I believe the closest I can give to a perfect answer to that question. I will just say this, and it's in the video. I was asked by a BBC interviewer not long ago, talking about utopia and dystopia, are you an optimist as a futurist? And I said, well, it depends what you mean by optimist, because when the word appeared in the English language in the 18th century, it didn't mean what we think it does. It didn't mean a sort of naive, Pollyanna-ish view of the future. It meant that good ultimately triumphs over evil. That's what it meant. So I said to this interviewer, so optimism in its original form didn't mean glass half full, as we think. It meant glass half empty but could be full. So it's a realism with a big dose of idealism thrown in, which is pretty much what Christian faith is when you think about it. So I don't look to either utopia or dystopia. I don't believe in technological determinism. I don't believe technology decides our destiny. I believe human choice about technology does that. It's been that way with genetic engineering. It's been that way with nuclear energy. It's been that way right back to the dawn of time. We need to pray that God gives people inside and outside the church, especially in governance, wisdom in limiting AI so that it serves humanity's best interests.
Awesome. This has been great. And now the big reveal for our listeners. Jack and I did an experiment. Mal Fletcher does not even exist. He is AI.
You just can't keep it together for an entire one of these, Joey. You just can't do it.
Hey, go to 2030plus.com. Follow Mal Fletcher on all those socials at Mal Fletcher. Thank you so much, sir. This has been really awesome. And I'm happy to have someone who is so far along in his knowledge about this stuff and someone who shares the Christian faith. You're somebody I want to follow and keep tabs on. So I appreciate all the knowledge that you're giving. And I like this phrase, making us future-friendly people.
Well, from my artificial heart to your human heart, thank you for having me today. It's been great, and I hope the audience has taken some good things from it.
Awesome. Thank you so much for your time. We really do appreciate it.
You've been listening to the Things You Won't Hear on Sunday Seacoast Podcast. In the show notes, you'll see a link to our Facebook group page. Also, we'd love for you to consider subscribing so you get these episodes downloaded right when they come out. Thanks so much for listening.